Yellaregu Namaskara. My name is Sohan Maheshwar and I'm a developer advocate with AWS based out of the Netherlands. Fun fact, I actually am from Karnataka. I lived in Bangalore up until 2020, at which point I moved for this role. So, in my role as a developer advocate, I frequently look at emerging technology that is going to become big in the future. And I'm so excited to be able to share something that I think is going to be huge when it comes to the cloud very soon. I'm talking about how you can build cloud infrastructure using code. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about building cloud infrastructure using Python. So, today, what we'll cover is this concept called infrastructure as code. Again, if you don't know what that means, that's completely fine because that's what I'll be explaining today. I will talk about something called AWS Cloud Development Kit. I'll talk a bit about getting started and how you can, actually try this out. And I'll quickly show you a demo of how easy it is. So if you're not familiar, AWS or Amazon Web Services is the world's leading cloud infrastructure provider. And few of y'all might have experience with the cloud. Few of y'all, I'm sure, have heard of it. Uh, Essentially, almost all the apps that you use nowadays, their infrastructure is built on the cloud. And if you want to build like a server, or if you want a database, or if you want analytics, for something that you're building, you can actually use cloud infrastructure that AWS provides. Now, at reInvent, which is our yearly conference, a couple of years ago, our CTO, Dr. Ferner Vogels, said something very interesting. He said, the future looks like this, where all the code you ever have to write is business logic. Few of y'all, I'm sure, are developers here. And when you're writing code for either your startup or a product that you're working on, or even if you're working in a service company, there's a lot more that you do apart from writing code. You set up environments, you make sure that testing is there, you make sure there's production and development environments. There's a lot more that you do apart from just focusing on your business logic. Now, this takes away a little bit from agility, from innovation, from flexibility, and from the fact that you spend your time not focusing on your core competency, which is writing code that your customers will really like. If you take a look at any modern application on the internet right now, it could be anything from an Instagram to an Ola. This is sort of what it looks like. All modern cloud application, they are not monoliths as we call them. It's not one large application where all the services are there in that one application. In fact, it is something called a bunch of microservices where there is something for search, there is a database, there's analytics, there's serverless, there's a load balancer. And if you don't know what any of those things means, it's completely fine. But all you need to know is that each of these applications, like again Instagram, is made up of many, many smaller bits of applications, all of which talk to each other. Now, if you have to set this up manually, that takes a lot of effort. If you have to set up the infrastructure for each of this, that takes effort. Which is why a few years ago there was this concept called infrastructure as code. Now, what infrastructure as code is very interesting. Suppose it didn't exist, what you had to do is go into the AWS console and you had to create infrastructure by hand. So let me take an example. Say you're building an app and you needed a virtual server. So then what you had to do is log on to AWS, look up EC2, manually by hand click on all the settings that you want, hit the launch instance button, and it would launch an instance. So you're doing this by hand. Again, if you're building like a small POC or maybe just like a MVP, like a minimal viable product, that's great. You can do it easily. You sort of get a good understanding if you're starting out. For a large scale application, though, that becomes very difficult. Mainly because imagine doing this every week for like 3 years, or imagine doing this for like 1,000 servers. It's manual, it's time consuming. It's not just you doing it, it's an entire team. So even if one small configuration change, you get options like this. Even if one small change or one small mistake happens, your entire system goes down. So it's not very reproducible, it's very error prone. So to codify all of this, there was this new paradigm called infrastructure as code, where you're writing out code to create infrastructure. That solves all of these problems that you see here. It's not manual, it could be time consuming, but it's not error prone and it's reproducible. So what we would essentially do was you'd write a script, like let's call it infrastructure.txt, and it wouldn't just be you writing that script, it would be other people in your team. And this script would translate to something that would create your organization's infrastructure. There is a service in AWS which is very powerful called AWS Cloud Formation. There are other similar services on the internet like HashiCorp's Terraform. So what these services do is that they look at some code that you've written. It could be something like create a server with these configurations, create a database. It looks at that code, it talks to an SDK like the AWS SDK, and it creates your organization's infrastructure. Now, this is so much better than actually doing it by hand. Uh, to give you a real world example, think of it this way. If you want to ask someone to get coffee for you, you're telling them on Monday morning, go straight down the hallway, take a left, pick up the jar, put coffee and milk and water into it, put it into the coffee machine, bring it out, and bring it back to me. So you're codifying every step, you're telling every step, this is exactly what happens, and that person does it for you. Now, the problem with this is it absolutely works. It's great. It's reproducible. You can do it across teams. Um, but sometimes this can get fairly verbose. As you can see, if I have to create something called a virtual private cloud or a VPC, where most organizations for their servers will create a cloud just for those servers for security. So if you have to create a VPC, I can just do something like this, say, these are my properties, these are my subnets. These are my public subnet number one, number two. These are my availability blocks. And as you can see, it's written in either JSON or YAML, which is it's a markup language. Now this is great. A lot of corporations, especially ones deploying large modern applications, use this. And essentially, what infrastructure as code is where what I just described. You're coding in JSON or YAML. You upload this to, like, say, an S3 bucket, and then something like a cloud formation creates your infrastructure stack out of this. Now, like I said, there is one tiny problem in the sense that you're technically not writing code in the way that you and I write code. We write code in Python, we write code in Node.js, with the for loop, with conditionals. If you look at this, this is just pretty much imperative statement making. You're saying, this is a type, this is what I want. This is an availability zone, this is what I want. And it becomes fairly verbose. So a few years ago, there was a service that AWS launched called AWS CDK, or Cloud Development Kit, which changed the paradigm from infrastructure as code to infrastructure is code. Now think about this. This is, I think, really mind blowing. I always work with emerging tech, and my mind is so often blown by how amazing technology is. You're a programmer right now, you know Python. You don't know much about cloud, perhaps. Instead of going through and learning YAML and JSON and CloudFormation, what if you could just write code that would create cloud infrastructure for you? So the onboarding is really simple, and it speeds up your development. It's completely customizable and shareable as well. So you can write a construct that we call to maybe create a VPC, and you can share it with another organization. And they can just copy paste that code and run the exact same thing. And the great thing is you can do all of this within your IDE as well. So if you're using VS Code, which is more of a text editor, but you can do it straight out of there and you don't have to context switch. So CDK does just that. It is open source. It is a multi-language software development framework for actually modeling your cloud infrastructure. And this uses reusable components, so you don't have to really do this over and over again, even within your company. So say you've done it successfully for an MVP, another department wants to do it, you can just share code as you would otherwise, and your cloud infrastructure is built. CDK supports TypeScript, JavaScript, Java, C Sharp, and Python. And in today's demo, of course, I'm going to show you how to do it in Python. So this really is level 2 of infrastructure as code, or infrastructure is code. You're writing a Python program which talks to CDK. Now, CDK, in a sense, is technically not doing any of the creation of the cloud infrastructure. It is just translating the program you have written in Python to something that CloudFormation can understand. So it's translating your code into something that CloudFormation can understand, which then creates the infrastructure. Just to give you an example, you can do something like this, and I've put a JS app there on purpose in case there are a few JS coders out there as well. But it looks simple as this, where you literally write few lines of code, and this goes ahead and creates your cloud infrastructure. And I'll show you how easy it is to do. Now, we don't have as much time today to talk about the depths of how it works, but essentially what you need to know is this. You're writing code in Python, and that is talking to CDK or Cloud Development Kit. In your code, there is your infrastructure stack, and each stack is made up of something called constructs. Now, a construct is a line of commands or a bunch of commands which do a particular thing. So if you want to create, say, a S3 bucket, you can just say something like create S3 bucket, and that would be a construct. Constructs can be a little more popular as well. You can create, like, say, a Lambda function with a database and an API gateway in front using a construct. And like I said before, these constructs are completely reusable. There is also a construct library for free online. So, if you have to create something really complex, for instance, and you're saying, hey, I'm new to CDK, but I have to create like a virtual private cloud with a subnet which connects to an EC2 instance, which also speaks to an Amazon RDS database. It might sound daunting, but literally you can go to the construct library, see that requirement, and just deploy that, and all of that code is with you, and you have to just run the code. So it makes that development of cloud infrastructure so much easier. And the best part is, as a programmer, you will be able to actually understand what's happening uh, by just looking at the code. So that source code is what you're writing. That goes into the CDK CLI, which compiles the code. It synthesizes it to a CloudFormation template, which takes care of the rest and deploys your cloud infrastructure. Just to give you an example of how simple and how easy this is, if you were to do this via CloudFormation, which is create a VPC, you would need 270 lines of YAML code. It is, honestly, it is little verbose. You have to write all of that, and you make one mistake, all of it goes for a toss. In CDK and using Python, guess how many lines of code you would need? Just the one. All I have to do is say VPC equal to ec2.vpc, reference itself, and just give it a name. I'm calling it my VPC. Literally just this. And in fact, if you don't believe me, I'm going to show you a demo of doing just this one line of code to show you how it can actually go ahead and create your cloud infrastructure. So enough of me talking. I know you love to see some code. So even if it's one line of code, let us go and show a demo of how this works. Here's a demo. There are a couple of prerequisites before you try this out, and I implore you to try this out after you go home today. One is, of course, you need Python. Well, I'm sure all of you all already have that. You need to install the AWS CLI, the command line interface, and for that you, of course, need an AWS account and a user ID. Few of you all might not need it. There might be few students. AWS does have a very, very generous free tier for a year, which gives you a lot of capacity, so you don't have to worry about getting charged. You do have to give a debit or credit card though. If you're a student, do find out from your university if you're part of the Activate or Academy programs, and they will be able to hook you up with AWS accounts that you can use free of charge. Try it out. So you get started by installing the AWS CDK toolkit, and you can do that using either pip or npm. I prefer npm install for this example. So you just do an npm install AWS CDK, and just to make sure it's installed correctly, do CDK hyphen version. Right, so we have an AWS account, we have the AWS CLI, and we have installed AWS CDK. Let's go ahead and see what needs to be done. I've pre-recorded the demo so that it'll be easy. So I'm just going to create a directory called CDK test, and I will cd into it. All right. So you always get started by doing CDK init. You're initializing it, and you can start with the sample app and mention the language. If you're doing it in Java, you mention Java, but of course we're doing it in Python, and it creates a directory for you. Even given that it's Python, it also creates a virtual environment so that you can run your Python script within that. You can just set your source to the virtual environment that's actually just created. So you just do source dot virtual environment slash activate, and it's done. So maybe now we can take a look at the directory structure. This is what it looks like. There is a setup.py file. There is a CDK test where the app.py is. There are few requirements which are in a requirements.txt file. So we just do a pip install requirements.txt, which installs some dependencies. Again, you just have to run it. You don't have to worry about what it is. And I'm opening up my code in Visual Studio Code. So let's take a look at it. Again, remember, this is the sample app that we're starting off. It's always good to start off with that because the directory structures are there. So app.py is the starting point of your program. Again, you don't have to worry, but you can see the regions mentioned there. CDK test underscore stack is where you would make your changes. I can get rid of whatever is there earlier, get rid of all of the code and start fresh because I promised you one line of code. Now we're going to create a VPC, and to create that, I need to install a particular library for CDK. Each AWS service has its own library. So I do pip install aws-cdk.aws-ec2. EC2, is Elastic Compute Cloud. I've installed this particular library. So I'm going to import that into my Python file. I just say import aws underscore ec2 as ec2 so that I can use this later. Here's it. Here's the one line of code I promised, literally one line. All right. So I do VPC equal to ec2 dot VPC. And as you can see, there is code completion in the IDE itself. So you don't have to look at a lot of documentation. You can just look at your IDE and do it off. And I just say self because I'm referencing the scope. Don't worry. And I just give it a name, very imaginatively, I'm calling it my VPC. All I have to do is say, oh yeah, I can do CDK diff to see what change has actually happened since we first initialized our CDK. And as you can see, with that one line of code, all of this has been created. It's created a VPC, it's created a subnet, a routing table, there's a NAT gateway. I mean, you don't even have to worry about some of these things. The great thing is you can customize all of these, but you can choose to use the defaults, which is what I did. I do a CDK synth, which essentially converts that one line of code into a CloudFormation template. And like I said, it's like 270 lines of CloudFormation. Look at that. Imagine writing all of that. Your life is so much more easier right now. And yeah, that's it. I'm done. So I can deploy this right now. To deploy it, there is one step that you need to know, which is you need to bootstrap this so that you can deploy to CloudFormation. Again, just one line of code. I mean, one command line, which is CDK bootstrap, and it's done. And now we're actually ready to install this. So I'm just going to do CDK deploy. What CDK deploy does is it looks at that CloudFormation, that code that's been synthesized already, and it starts deploying each of these to your AWS account. So I'm creating this cloud infrastructure with that one line of code that I had written. So this usually takes maybe a couple of minutes. I've edited the video, of course, but it took maybe 3 minutes when I did the demo. And yeah, this is my AWS management console. I can just go to CloudFormation and you will actually see it happen live. So if I click on CDK test, as you can see, it says create in progress. And if you can click on the events tab, you'll see all of the events that are happening with that one line of code. So it's done. All of it is done. And let me go to my AWS console right now. Yep, there we go. I can actually search for VPC. There we go. And I can see that my VPC has been created with that one line of code. Literally, right? I can just see there. I mean, how cool is that? Imagine how much your life is simplified, or even if you don't know cloud, how easy it is to get into cloud by just knowing, even if it's basic Python programming. There you go. I have my route table and all set. So it has a lot of benefits in the sense, like I mentioned, you can get into it straight from any programming language. You can use logic, you can use object oriented techniques, etc. You can use while, for loops, if else, etc. Remember that example of the coffee I gave earlier? The difference is, instead of giving all those instructions for someone to get you coffee, I can just say get me coffee on Monday morning. So in the earlier example, if say there was no water, your entire process would actually break down because you've typed it so imperatively. But here, the program, since it's program, it's a lot more agile and it's a lot more flexible. It's able to deal and roll with the punches. So if something happens, you can still, sort of make fallbacks because you have things like logic and conditionals. So really very exciting. I really think that this is going to be big very, very soon. A lot of people are very excited about it. So do check it out. For next steps, check out amazon.com, aws.amazon.com/CDK. It's open source, so it's all on GitHub. To get started, do go to cdkworkshop.com. Very, very good tutorials in all languages supported. Anyway, this was a lot of fun. I hope you learned something new today. Follow me on Twitter, on Twitch, and also LinkedIn. I host a show on YouTube called The Emerging Tech Show, where I talk about emerging technology. So go to YouTube, type it out, and follow me there as well. Anyway, thank you so much. Namaskara. Have a good day. Bye.